In the summer of 1944, a German reconnaissance pilot filed a routine report. Below him, in a field in northern France, was an entire American armored division. Tanks, trucks, artillery, spread across the landscape exactly as a division on the move would look. The pilot's commanding officer studied the photographs, updated his maps, and ordered his forces to redeploy. The division was real. The intelligence was accurate. The only problem? None of it was real. This was the work of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, a unit so secret that its very existence was classified for more than 5 decades. They called themselves the Ghost Army. 1,100 men. Artists, architects, sound engineers, and radio operators. Their weapons were not bullets and bayonets. Their weapons were inflatable rubber tanks, 30-pound speakers, wire recording machines, and the most powerful tool in any soldier's arsenal, the enemy's own assumptions. Over 14 months, they staged more than 20 deception operations across France, Luxembourg, Belgium, and Germany. They fooled German intelligence again and again. And when the war ended, they swore an oath of secrecy that most of them kept until their deaths. The Ghost Army was the brainchild of 2 men who could not have been more different. Major Ralph Ingersoll was a celebrity journalist and best-selling author described by the New York Times as a prodigiously energetic egotist. His commanding officer once said of him, "I have never met anyone who was such a bright guy who was such a goddamned liar." He would say anything to get what he wanted. His partner was Colonel Billy Harris, a straight-arrow West Point graduate from a family of generals. Ingersoll was the wild idea man. Harris was the one who figured out how to make those ideas work. Together, in late 1943, they proposed the creation of a dedicated American deception unit. The British had been using deception since North Africa, Operation Bertram, which fooled Rommel at El Alamein. The Americans needed their own version. And they needed it before D-Day. The unit was activated on January 20, 1944, at Camp Forest, Tennessee. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops consisted of 4 specialized companies. The 603rd Camouflage Engineers handled visual deception. The 3132nd Signal Service Company Special handled sound. The 3133rd Signal Service Company Special handled radio. And the 406th Combat Engineers provided security. But what made the Ghost Army truly unusual was its recruitment. Army planners actively sought artists, set designers, advertising men, and architects. They sent recruiters to art schools in New York and Philadelphia. The result was a unit unlike any other in military history. Among the men who served, Bill Blass, who would become one of America's most famous fashion designers. Ellsworth Kelly, whose abstract paintings would hang in the world's greatest museums. Arthur Singer, who would illustrate the definitive guide to North American birds. And Art Kane, who would photograph some of the most iconic images in music history. These were not typical soldiers. But they were about to pull off something that had never been attempted before. 2 weeks after D-Day, elements of the Ghost Army landed in Normandy. Their first mission, simulate a fake Mulberry Harbor, an artificial port, using only lights and sound. The goal was to draw German artillery away from the real harbors that were supplying the Allied invasion. It worked. German guns targeted the Phantom port while the real supplies came ashore. But this was only a warm-up. The Ghost Army's next mission took them to Brest, where American forces were laying siege to a heavily fortified German garrison. The problem? There simply were not enough American troops to properly surround the city. The Germans inside vastly outnumbered the Americans outside. So the Ghost Army created a Phantom Army. They inflated their rubber tanks, set up fake command posts, and broadcast the sounds of an entire armored division advancing. German intelligence, watching from inside the fortress, reported that they were surrounded by an overwhelming force. The garrison held its position and never launched a breakout that could have devastated the thinly stretched American lines. This was the pattern the Ghost Army would refine again and again. Each operation was a production, in the most literal sense. The sonic deception alone was extraordinary. Engineers from Bell Labs had helped the 3,132nd record sounds of tank engines, infantry marching, and construction equipment onto wire recorders, the predecessor to magnetic tape. These recordings were mixed like a movie soundtrack to match whatever unit they were impersonating. The sound trucks, half-tracks mounted with powerful amplifiers, could broadcast these recordings so that they were audible 15 miles away. To a German forward observer positioned on a hill, the rumble of non-existent tanks was unmistakable and terrifyingly real. The radio operators of the 3,133rd were equally important. They created fake radio networks, mimicking the traffic patterns of real divisions, complete with fictional commanders, fake supply requests, and simulated transmission errors that made the traffic feel authentic. In September 1944, during Operation Bettembourg in Luxembourg, the Ghost Army impersonated not one but two entire armored divisions of Patton's Third Army, while the real divisions secretly moved north to launch a surprise attack. For 6 days, the Ghost Army broadcast fake radio traffic, inflated and repositioned decoys, and played the sounds of a massive armored force preparing for battle. German intelligence was convinced. They repositioned their own forces to face the Phantom Army, leaving the real sector dangerously weak. According to declassified after-action reports, the deception was so convincing that German prisoners later expressed bewilderment at how they had been outflanked by Americans who, they insisted, had been massed 20 miles away. The unit's most critical operation came in March 1945, Operation Viersen. The Allies were preparing to cross the Rhine River, the last major geographic barrier into Germany. The Germans knew exactly where the vulnerable crossing points were. The question was, where would the Americans strike? The Ghost Army was tasked with making the Germans believe the main crossing would be north of the actual assault point. They created an entire fake corps, complete with inflatable tanks, fake bridge construction, and radio traffic of a major force preparing to cross. The Germans took the bait. They moved reserves north to block the Phantom crossing. When the real American assault came, it faced significantly less resistance than it would have otherwise. The official history of the campaign noted that the deception directly contributed to the speed of the crossing. German artillery shells slammed into empty inflatable tanks while real soldiers secured the far bank. By July 1945, the war in Europe was over. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops had carried out more than 20 deception operations. They had simulated entire divisions across hundreds of miles of front line. They had never been discovered by the enemy. And then, they disappeared. Not physically. The men went home, returned to their careers, became the artists and designers and architects they had been before the war. But the Ghost Army itself vanished into classified files. The men were sworn to secrecy. They could not tell their wives, their children, or even their closest friends what they had done. The secrecy lasted for more than 50 years. Not until 1996 did the U.S. government declassify the Ghost Army's existence. When the story finally emerged, it stunned even military historians, who had no idea such a unit had ever existed. In 2022, more than 75 years after the war, the United States Congress awarded the Ghost Army the Congressional Gold Medal, the highest civilian honor the nation can bestow. By that time, only a handful of the original 1,100 were still alive to receive it. The Ghost Army raises a question that military historians still debate. How many lives did they save? The estimates vary, but the consensus is this: by diverting German forces, by forcing the enemy to defend against armies that did not exist, they shortened the war and reduced casualties on both sides. But perhaps their truest legacy is something else. In a war that consumed millions of lives and entire cities, the Ghost Army proved that the most powerful weapon is not always the biggest gun. Sometimes, it is a rubber tank, a wire recording, and the courage to convince an enemy that what he sees is what he fears. The men of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops never fired a shot in combat. They did not need to. Their ammunition was imagination. And they were the best armed soldiers in the entire European theater. The Ghost Army is one of the Second World War's best-kept secrets, finally told. If you want to understand how wars are really won, look closer at the stories that do not start with guns. In our next episode, we examine a weapon so strange that even its creators were not sure it would work, the bat bomb that America nearly used against Japan. I am your host on Combat Chronicles. If you found this story revealing, consider subscribing. There are a lot more secrets where this one came from.